Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to Part 6 of Argyltal sends his mortal friends and family down the river to get butt-fucked by demons. But hey, at least he felt kinda bad about it afterwards and resisted for a brief period of time. I am sure that made the crew, now suffering eternal torment, feel oh so much better. And Argyltal has been recounting all of this to Lorgar, who has been busily taking notes, although he probably did know about quite a lot of this beforehand, as he too had a nice long chat with Ingethel as he was deciding whether or not to send his sons off to the gentle mercies of the demons. And now that he has received all of the proof and the vindication that he requires, it is time for him to return to the Imperium and bring this truth to the rest of humanity. First, of course, he's going to have to take care of the evidence. Ingethel's tribesmen and all other life on Cadia needs to be wiped clean. You, my son, could never carry out la 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 la. Yeah, we know it at this bloody point. Lorgar doesn't even bother to hide it anymore. It's like, well, I don't enjoy genocide, but, we gotta do it, so fuck 'em. And I'd also like to point out, despite all of the horrible things that Argyltal has told Lorgar now, about the living hell of the Eldar worlds, about the demons, about the torture, about the betrayal, about all of the nasty, terrifying things that will befall humanity if this truth is truly the truth, Lorgar never bats so much as an eyelash at any of this. There is not a hint of hesitation in him. He doesn't care that this is a horrible truth that will bring nothing but suffering, death, and destruction to the vast majority of humanity. He doesn't give a shit. He never cared about humanity to begin with. All of those pretty words about how he did this for humanity is not but bullshit. He knows he is selling the soul of humanity right down the river, because the evidence of that bargain is sitting right in front of him. One of his very own sons turned into nothing more than a host for a demonic entity. And let's actually speak a bit about their reasoning for turning to chaos, shall we? Because very little, if any, in the way of reasoning is ever given. Now for Lorgar, it's obvious. Lorgar wants something to place above himself. Something greater than him, something to justify his actions. He had no trouble waging war in the name of the Emperor, mass indoctrinating whole populations, or killing hundreds of thousands in the Colchissian War, as long as it was for the Emperor. He could keep telling himself, I am not the one doing this, I can't commit blah 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 with a smile and so on. But then the Emperor ejected him. And then he was downcast, distraught. What have I done? This is horrible. And the very moment he doesn't even have proof, but thinks he has a chance of finding other gods, he commits yet more atrocities. He murders worlds, he stands idly by and watches human sacrifice be carried out in his name, and he wipes all life clean from the very planet who brought him the truth. Lorgar needs the gods because Lorgar does horrible things. Over and over and over again. And he just needs somebody to blame. Because he's not a bad person. He can't possibly be a bad person. He's Lorgar, the Emperor's conscience, his ideal, hope for a better world and so on. This is all the gods' fault, not Lorgar. But as for the rest of the word-bearers, well, again, as we've talked about, they are in reality little more than slaves to Lorgar's overriding will. But do they have their own justification? Do they have their own rationale for what they are doing? Kind of, but it's not much of one. When Argyltal goes to meet Cyrene to confess to her, she asks him why. Why did you believe this? These demons? Why do you think this is more than a Xenos lie? Why do you think that this is worth betraying the Imperium? And why do you think that humanity needs this? Argyltal doesn't give an answer. He simply states that without their masters, humanity would perish. Which, again, there is no reason to believe. The Emperor is defeating chaos. What exactly are we supposed to believe would happen if chaos was defeated? What great tragedy would befall humanity that would see it extinct? We don't know. The gods certainly don't give us any real answers. And as for the legitimacy, he simply says that, oh well, these are gods because countless religions call them gods, and they have power. So once again we return to A, they're powerful, and B, a new one, they're old. By that definition, the fucking Eldar are gods. The Necrontyr are gods. The Tyranids are gods. It makes no sense. But hey, at least I'll give Argyltal credit for not using the good old faith response that, oh, faith is its own reason, which is an even bigger load of bullshit than this is. Later, Argyltal is honored for his part in finding the truth, and he and his company are turned into the Gal Vorbak, the Blessed Sons, the elite of the Serrated Sun. And also, of course, the vanguard of Lorgar's betrayal. They've also done a damn good job of fooling the Custodes. Then again, the Custodes' primary objective is to make sure that the word-bearers are no longer worshipping the Emperor, and, well, I mean, they aren't, so I guess, technically speaking, they're not fooling the Custodes so much as telling them the precise truth, just withholding a few of the details. And after this, Lorgar goes into the warp himself. Now that he's had his sons take the brunt of the shit, now he ventures inside. Because Lorgar. Whereupon he gets shown yet more truths and secrets by Ingethel. He wanders the warp for God Emperor only knows how long, and his sons get visions of him passing through planets where the seas are made of boiling blood, and great big clanking structures of harsh iron and so on. He's also shown countless worlds scoured by Xeno's claws, which is an interesting little mention there. Claws. Because remember, once again, the demons like to spice in just a tiny bit of truth in their lies. And we do know of a certain species that was drawn to the galaxy precisely because of the events of the Horus Heresy. And they do have quite a lot of claws. It may be that the demons are showing Lorgar something along the lines of the same trick that they played on Horus. With Horus, they showed him the future, but the actual future, and just simply forgot to inform him that this was the future he would be creating, and not the future that would happen if he rejected them. Perhaps they are showing Lorgar something similar to it. They are showing Lorgar the Imperium beset by the Tyranid. Then again, I think perhaps something a little bit more overt would probably be more correct for Lorgar, because again, Lorgar doesn't actually give a flying fetching fuck about humanity. Because if he truly cared about humanity, he would not be handing it over to deities like this in the first place. But enough about that. The story is moving on, and so we shall as well. Indeed, it takes quite the leap into the future now. We don't get to see any of how the word-bearers turn the other legions, which is a real oversight. Perhaps later on in the series, maybe, but we now arrive with Zaphon briefing Argyltal on how they've turned all of the other traitor legions. How over 200 chaplains have been seconded to the various legions to set up lodges and so on. We also get a couple interesting little tidbits here. They speak of Olympia, and how Peteraba was forced to declare war on his own home world, and Zaphon mentions that it was orchestrated to perfection. Could the word-bearers have had something to do with the uprising on Olympia? I sure as hell wouldn't put it past them to trick another legion into doing something like that. After all, the wordbearers would almost certainly find it deliciously ironic to see another legion bombarding their perfect city. He also mentions that the chaplains have succeeded in turning the Alpha Legion, which is quite interesting. Now, of course, we know why the Alpha Legion turned, quote unquote. The Alpha Legion. They are such a cool idea, but also so very, very plot pointy at the very same time. When they're done correct, God, are they awesome. When they're done wrong, oof, are they cringe. But in this case, though, the chaplains think they've turned the Alpha Legion. Interesting. Now, again, we know it's blah 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 why they turned, so on. Were they pretending? Well, they knew about Lorcar, so were they like, oh, hey, chaplains, oh, what is this? Treachery? Oh, no, oh, but maybe. That would be a rather fascinating story to explore, wouldn't it? The Alpha Legion pretending to be taken in by Lorgar's words. And speaking of pretending, by the way, Argyll Tull has done a pretty damn good job of stringing the Custodes along. They suspect nothing, and Argyll Tull has developed quite a friendship with Aquilon, the leader of the Custodes Guard. Something Cyrene thinks he's doing as a sort of self-penance. Argyll Tull is not overly fond of this whole rebellion thing. He wants to be a freedom fighter, a good guy, you know? Whilst everyone around him seems painfully aware of the fact that they are traitors. I mean, on the one hand, I get it. They are betraying the Imperium, and they are fully aware of that, and additionally, the very term betrayal has a certain flavor and power in the warp, but at the same time, they act as out-and-out bad guys, whilst Argyll Tull at least has the good graces to pretend that he's doing this for a greater purpose. But I think this probably has more to do with the fact that the rest of the Legion has delved far deeper into the dark mysteries of chaos. It tends to be the case that the deeper you get into a religion that rewards you for causing pain and suffering, the less of a shit you're actually going to give about, well, causing pain and suffering and such on. Oh, and as a side note to the pretending thing, we also get introduced to the character called Ishak, a poor little mortal assigned to the Wordbearers Legion as a remembrancer, and hands down the second best character in the entire book, introducing some much-needed levity to the doom and gloom of all this betrayal, especially now that Argyll Tull has started moralizing, which I do find vaguely hilarious. You were the bastard who dropped the Gallowfields in the first place, my dude. You chose this path, and I get it, you're ever so sad about it, but just like Lorgar, I don't actually care if you're sad about doing horrible things, I care more about the fact that you're doing horrible things. I mean, being sad about it will get you at least some pity points, but at the end of the day, you're still doing horrible shit. And Argyll Tull would have to keep up the pretense for quite a while, until finally the gods called. Argyll Tull had been informed that himself and the Garl Vorbak would be the first called upon when the gods were set to launch into action, and then their true change would be upon them. Up until this point, they'd only been possessed in a more ephemeral way, you know, voices in your head and that kind of stuff. But during a compliance action, the entirety of the Garl Vorbak were driven to their knees, as the changes began to work upon their bodies, turning them into something more pleasing as far as chaos was concerned. This was noted by the Custodes, but they did not know what was happening. They tried to report to the Emperor, but apparently the Wordbearers have been blocking their communications for a very, very long time now. Zaphen even mentioning that he has a safeguard in place in case any of the communications comes through. And this has been done by nailing Psykers to the wall of De Profundus, the ship, and then possessing them with demons. who would then devour any psychic messages sent out and instead replace them with a falsified report dictated to the demon by the word-bearers. This is believable enough, but the idea that the custodies would have no secret code or even any proper coding of their messages is odd. I mean, again, they are security agents as much as anything else, and for them to send messages that the word-bearers could easily falsify, well, either they slipped up, got drunk one night, and told the word-bearers about their code system, or they don't have one. Either way would be a little bit odd, though they do have a potential excuse in that the fleet has been pushing around the outer edges of the Imperium, staying inside of areas that are somewhat stormy, and so they might only have to fortify the occasional message because the rest simply don't get through. And the custodians would obviously know this as well, that when they are in regions of such petulant weather, most of their messages would probably not reach anywhere, and so they might only expect an answer to every 5th or 6th message. Which does also bring up the question, how do they falsify the messages? Do these demon psykers also devour incoming messages? Can they send to the Oculatus Imperator's own astropath? And that's when stuff starts getting really, really risky as well, since many astropaths have very specific shorthand. And if the Oculi Imperator's astropath starts receiving messages that look odd, that could start raising some serious suspicion, but clearly, that didn't happen. Argyle and the rest of the Gall of Vorbak sequestered themselves in meditation for the remainder of their changes, which don't last all that long, apparently. The first one to appear, relatively unchanged, at least in appearance, is Zephan, except he no longer removes his helmet, because, well, he can't. He also constantly has a burning brazier on the back of his power armor, presumably to cover up a certain smell. Oh, and speaking of quinkydinks, Horus is now carrying out his own rebellion. The word-bearers receive word they are to head to the Istvan system to reinforce the punishment flotilla that are being sent towards Horus, and suddenly the warp clears. And they've got a straight shot right to Istvan, in record speed as well. At this point, even the custodies, remarkably naive as they are, perk up at least a little bit, going, this is odd. But it pretty much ends there, and soon thereafter, they're happy to go on with the usual business, not even raising so much as an eyebrow at the fact that the word-bearers and the rest of the Astartes deem that the custodies should take no part in the fighting on the planet below. Instead, they will be given command of 4 vessels as a safeguard against boarding actions. The custodies really are remarkably compliant, aren't they? They've insisted to follow the Galvor back down to every other action, but this one, in which case there is an actual betrayal, Astartes on Astartes, they choose to acquiesce to the word-bearers' requests that they stay back and babysit the ships? Okay. Remarkably blue-eyed would be one hell of an understatement. Or perhaps it would be more fair to say that Argyle deserves a bloody Oscar. Whichever one it is, the custodians are none the wiser about what is about to transpire. And in preparations of it, Lorgar rejoins the Legion and has a meeting with the Gall Vorbak, who are starting to show some interesting signs of, hostility? They are described as standing together yet apart, guarding their private space with a degree of viciousness, perhaps even, and there is little love lost within the Legion. Zephan addresses Corferon and says that he has used some of his recent rituals himself, and notes he would love to learn more from Corferon about what he has in store from the Custodies. Whilst Corferon simply just says that maybe. Argyle takes a chance to bait Corferon a little bit, accusing him of being afraid. The wordbearers break apart remarkably quickly, even more so than the other legions when they start getting infested by chaos, which is interesting because it is in direct contrast to the idea that they are also loyal to Lorgar. Erebus and Corferon, well, they've been working against Lorgar for a very long time now, so they are clearly not as enslaved to Lorgar as Argyle apparently is, which is an interesting little point of incongruity there. We also get our first, or, well, is it first, maybe second little look at Sevatar, one of my favourite characters from the entire book series, not because he's particularly interesting or, pivotal or anything like that, but because he is a damn funny little motherfucker. I really do wish that he had, well, more space, really. But sadly, he's not around for very long. Lorgar gives a little speech, which is enough to at least spark a modicum of camaraderie, at least for the time being. But the traitor legions are, as Lorgar himself said, not friends. Their alliance is tenuous at best, and whether or not Horus will be enough of a man to keep them all together, well, that will be quite interesting to see, will it not? But then it is on to the battle itself. The battle on Istvan. Something I'm gonna have to do a video on at some point. A nice big fat one, I think. Though the details are often a little bit sparse, but sooner or later. Anywho, then the dumb happens. Yes, indeed. So, the information we have here comes over the course of a few chapters, so I'll try to relay it in a decent fashion. Apparently, after Lorgar left the Gal Vorbak and ventured into the warp himself, he then came out again, rejoined Corferon and Erebus in the main Legion forces, and he was apparently rattled by what he had seen within the warp, and feared that humanity was not ready for this truth after all, the horrors, as he called it. Which is damn interesting because Lorgar knew all of this before he went into the warp. Ingethel told him straight to his face what he was going to do with his sons. He sent them in there anyway. He talked with Ingethel for 3 days, face to face, with a monster so horrifying that it makes people vomit just by smelling it. And after hearing what it had to say, and Argyle recounting of his time within the warp, Lorgar was more than ready to toss the entire Imperium into a state of civil war. And yet, now he's having doubts? What changed? What happened? What was the thing that made Lorgar suddenly think differently? It's never explained. Apparently, when he rejoined the Legion, Erebus and Corferon were complaining of his fey nature, that it was difficult to rouse him to anger and to do what must be done. Which does not at all seem like the Lorgar we have been reading about so far. The Lorgar that, without so much as a hint of hesitation, wiped out the entire population of Cadia merely to hide his own tracks. The same Lorgar that hand-waved away the loss of 3 ships in warp storms as he was questing for the truth. The very same Lorgar that oversaw human sacrifice, including that of a Custodes, and once again, barely a murmur of discontent. And it comes across as such a blatant plot point to me. What I see when I'm reading this is just Lorgar going, "Oh no, I didn't want this, never this. Why did it have to come to this? Evil Corferon and Erebus, they were the ones plotting and scheming. I am but an innocent little lad." Which is fucking ridiculous. Lorgar was the one who pushed for this. Sure, Corferon and Erebus most definitively guided him in this direction, but it was Lorgar that pushed ahead, regardless of the cost, regardless of the horrors, regardless of the creatures he had to ally himself with to find the truth. And once he heard that the Emperor had lied to them, something as measly as a lie to cover over a far greater horror, he was ready to have his head on a spike and his Imperium burning. And now suddenly he's hesitant. Yeah, I don't buy it. I do not buy it for an absolute nanosecond. And then, he even has a moment of rejecting his gods. I am not a mere puppet to the gods. I will choose my own death, and goes off to fight with Korax. Lorgar put this truth above everything. He gave his own sons' lives away for this truth. He wandered within the warp for God Emperor only knows how long. He came back fully intent upon doing this. He kept writing the word, kept engaging with the demons, discovering new rituals, planning and scheming, and now, suddenly, we're supposed to think that no, he didn't actually do any of this. If that was to actually be the case, that would be one fuck of a character change. And yet, it is told to us over the course of about 2 pages. Yeah. Dumb. Very dumb. And again, it is done purely to paint Lorgar as the victim, despite the fact that he so far has done absolutely nothing under duress. He has chosen to take every single step into damnation. And at any point, he could have stopped this, but he chose not to. Even when the word-bearers underwent a minor purge of those guilty of wrongthink, Lorgar did nothing. And it is far too late and far too convenient for Lorgar to suddenly develop a conscience now. Especially as the word-bearer's secret is now out in the open thanks to a certain pictographer who picked his way into the monastic deck and found a shrine to the ruinous powers. By coinkydink chance, he was then contacted by the astropath of the Oculi Imperator, who brought him immediately to see the Custodes, who, understandably, were a bit miffed at this revelation, and decided to go and have a chat with the word-bearer's confessor, Cyrene. And this did not end well. Argyltal had taken some precautions to ensure Cyrene's safety in the case of somebody learning their secret, in that he left Xenu behind, along with his conqueror, the honorary member of the Word-Bearers Legion. And undoubtedly this would have proven plenty to discourage pretty much any invasion of the Blessed Lady's privacy, but not several Custodes. Although the Conqueror did manage to finish off one of the Custodes, it was relatively swiftly put down, along with Xenu and Cyrene. It's a bit interesting that Xenu decided to side with the Word-Bearers, seeing as he was so annoyed by the little nonsensical inconsistencies in his favoured battle mech. You'd think that, along with the fact that all of his other battle mechs would probably also start showing some interesting symptoms after a while, exposed to the Gal Vorbak, might convince him to be less than friendly towards them. But Argyltal is a charismatic and nice fellow, so perhaps he made friends with the tech priest as well. Entirely possible. Unfortunately, this did turn what was intended to be an interrogation and probably a capture of Cyrene into something a bit more violent. It turns out that in this particular case, keeping Cyrene safe was probably the very thing that got her killed. Not that we should blame Argyltal for that, he was just trying to keep her safe, but, well... Personally, I would have suggested placing the Conqueror outside of her room rather than inside of it. I mean, the odds of getting her caught in the crossfire seems considerably less with the other option. Pissed off by this, Argyltal follows the Custodes down to the planet below, which they have tried to escape to. Realizing that they have no chance against the entire fleet, they have tried to make a run for it, but they are stopped rather swiftly. The remainder of the Galvorbak, after having taken a pretty damn severe beating on the surface of Istvan, hunt down the Custodes and kill them all, losing only a few of their number in the process. Though, to be fair, the Custodes were not exactly in tip-top shape after having ridden a crashing stormbird down to the surface. And with the death of the Custodes, of Cyrene, and of Saphan impaled upon a guardian spear, the book ends with Argyltal heading towards Calth, and yet another betrayal. So, all in all, what do we think about the first Heretic? Considering I've made now 6 parts on this book, well, it is a rather big and fat little bastard. Primarily because a lot of time has to be dedicated to the thinking of the word-bearers and how their action seems to conflict with, well, what they're saying. Logar being the prime example. He starts by essentially explaining to us that divinity is power. Then, when divinity rejects him, he redefines that. Divinity is no longer divine because power, it is divine because it accepts being worshipped, because faith is more important than divine. But at the end of the day, a priest without a gospel is no priest at all, and Logar needs something to place above himself to excuse his actions. We see this as he hunts for the truth. He was entirely fine with the war on cultures, with the wars of compliance in the Imperium's name, as long as he had the Emperor as a greater goal. After that, he was entirely fine with countless more atrocities and destroying entire worlds and populations, because once again he had a greater goal, the truth. Then, when he enters into the warp, he suddenly emerges all cowed and wondering if this truly is right for humanity, but we get none of that development. We are not told how that happened. We are simply just told that, oh yeah, no, he changed his mind. Which is dumb. I don't know if they ran out of pages allocated for this book or something, but once again, an actual explanation as to why we are supposed to believe this would go a long way, because it really just comes across as a cynical attempt to make us feel for Logar, despite having no real reason to do so. In the case of Argyltal, however, we do have reasons to feel sympathy for him. He is the character that Logar really should have been. He feels bad for his actions, but again, I don't think that's necessarily a defense. Indeed, in the case of Argyltal, a better defense is probably the fact that he is practically enslaved to Logar's influence. He does a thing, and then he resists it. He does a thing, and then he hates himself for it. He actively seeks out punishment for himself and penance to make up for things that he hates. Which is, again, utterly nonsensical, because he doesn't give us a reason for why this is so important. Why, Argyltal, do you find worship to be this necessary? Why do you think that submitting yourself to this horror is so important? The evidence you have been given is paltry at best, and the whole thing that humanity will be doomed without faith, again, they keep saying this throughout the book, the Imperium ravaged by alien claws, but we don't get any indication of what they've been shown. At least with Horus, we know precisely what the Chaos Gods showed him, and because of that, it was a really clever trick. In the case of the Wordbearers, again, all we really have as the reasoning for why they worship the Chaos Gods is because they're powerful and old, which seems like a rather shitty justification. I'll go more into this in the Mind of Logar video, which I am working on at the moment, but for now, I'll wrap this up here. The First Heretic is by no means a bad book, but I would say it is massively overrated, and it shows Logar in an extraordinarily favourable light that he simply has not earned. Logar throughout the book is callous, vindictive, angry, vengeful, sadistic downright, malicious indeed. And then at the very end, over the course of like 2 pages, he expresses some remorse. Out of nowhere. And then Corfedon and Erebus bitch at him for not having enough killer instinct. What? That's not character development. That is simply telling the reader, feel bad for character now, because I said so. Anywho, until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you very much for listening, and there'll probably be a blank week until the next lore video, because holy shit. The Horus Heresy is not difficult to make, but God, it is time-consuming. Reading the books and going through the audiobooks, making notes whilst recording. Let's just say that at the time when I finished this video, I had rendered it done and I started uploading it and I could go to bed. It was 7 in the morning, so I'm probably going to take a small interim vacation. Have a good day.